In the last lecture, we left King Henry and his soldiers in a rather dangerous position. They're behind schedule after taking too long with the siege of Harfleur. Dysentery is running rampant throughout the camp, and their passage forward is being blocked by the French army, which is almost 5 times their size. They're trying to make for the city of Calais in order to winter there, but the route is leading them straight through territory that's heavily patrolled by French soldiers. So in order to get safely through, they're going to be forced into a fight. And on the evening before the battle, we've already seen that the French are making merry in their camps, taking wagers on who they're going to capture, and on who can capture more English soldiers. And they have all these high expectations for the day to come. In Henry's camp, morale is low. The chorus at the beginning of Act 4 gives a good description of what the atmosphere there is like. We read, "The confident and overlusty French do the low-rated English play at dice, and chide the crippled, tardy-gated knight who like a foul and ugly witch doth limp so tediously away. The poor condemned English, like sacrifices, by their watchful fires sit patiently, and inly ruminate the morning's danger. And their gesture sad, investing lank lean cheeks in war-worn coats, presented them unto the gazing moon so many horrid ghosts. Oh now, who will behold the royal captain of this ruined band, walking from watch to watch, from tent to tent? Let him cry praise and glory on his head, for forth he goes and visits all his host, bids them good morrow, and with a modest smile, and calls them brothers, friends, and countrymen. Upon his royal face there is no note how dread an army hath enrounded him, nor doth he dedicate one jot of colour unto the weary and all-watched night, but freshly looks and overbears attaint with cheerful semblance and sweet majesty, that every wretch, pining and pale before, beholding him, plucks comfort from his looks. A largesse universal like the sun his liberal eye doth give to every one, thawing cold fear, that mean and gentle all behold, as may unworthiness define, a little touch of Harry in the night." And we see that they feel like they're dead already. These line of ragged ghosts that the moon is beholding. And on this night, in the midst of all this, we see King Henry coping with his stress by resorting to some of his old habits, trickery and play acting. He borrows a cloak from one of his knights and, disguised as a common soldier, makes his way through the camp and interacts with his men. Now, in the past plays, we've seen him disguise himself as a robber, as a waiter, and now he's having a bit of fun again, but he also wants to boost morale. There's a purpose to it this time. He wants to get a sense of what his men are thinking and to set a good example to them for being brave and to show discipline. So he sets out, wandering from campfire to campfire, and he has a brief encounter with Pistol, and then he comes across 3 ordinary soldiers and gets into a conversation with them about what's going to happen the following day. They're kind of bemoaning their fate, complaining about the fact that even if things go bad, the king will probably accept a ransom for his own life from the French, while the commoners are going to be condemned to die in any case. And one of these 3 soldiers, Michael Williams, even goes so far as to suggest that they don't even know if they're fighting for an honorable cause. And if they're not, then all of the bloodshed, loss of life, and even the destination of their immortal souls, he says, will be on the king's head. In other words, if a soldier has been living riotously and isn't a saved Christian, the fact that their soul will go to hell if they're struck down in battle is their commander's fault, Henry's fault. And Henry says that this is going too far. He's not responsible for the state of his men's souls any more than a master would be if his wicked servant was struck down while going about to do his master's business on the highway. He says that every subject's duty is to the king, but every subject's soul is his own, which is reasonable, I think, although we've seen from Henry's own warning to the Bishop of Canterbury back in Act 1 that he does feel some burden for the other points of William's argument, the bloodshed and the tragedy and the death that will follow. Well, their argument heats up, and the two of them, Henry and William, exchange gloves as an act of defiance. And what this means is that after the battle, if they see each other, they will have some sort of a fight or a duel. Henry gets the last laugh here because he's the king, and Williams has just sworn to box the king on the side of the head without even knowing it. But for the moment, he leaves the soldiers, goes off on his own, and he delivers a soliloquy that's reminiscent of both King Richard's and of his father, King Henry's. It's a soliloquy that reveals the immense isolation and human frailty that comes with being the king. He laments that his burden is heavier to bear than that of a common soldier's. Like his father lamented that sleep had abandoned him to attend on ship boys and sailors. You'll remember that from the last play. And here, Henry V says that a wretched slave sleeps with a more sound mind than a king does. And the idea here is that it's better to be someone of no account than to be a ruler tasked with such a burden of responsibility. And he also speaks of how beneath the majesty, beneath the ceremony, he is no more or less of a man than anyone else. And this harkens back to Richard's moment of self-awareness, when he learned that his kingdom was essentially lost. So you can see how Henry is resurrecting these ideas from past plays and synthesizing them in his thoughts. He's internalized or learned the lessons that Richard and his father had to learn, as well as lessons from other characters such as Hotspur and Falstaff, and he's giving new meaning to them, a new context. And this speaks to King Henry as the great redeemer in this cycle of stories, or the great king who is coming in to restore order and make everything right, which is what he's been trying to be all along. Finally, during the soliloquy, he says a prayer to God. In it, he asks forgiveness for his father's sin of deposing Richard, and we learned that Henry has had Richard properly interred with all the appropriate funeral rites and honors that were due to him, and that he pays people to say prayers for Richard's soul. So King Henry knows that this is the battle that will prove whether what his father said before his death was true or not. Did the blood guilt of Richard die with Henry IV, or is it still to be answered for by Henry V? This question and this scene does a good job of tying all four of the plays that we've read together so that a narrative unity is achieved. And it's for that reason that these plays are sometimes referred to as the Henriad, a pun on the Iliad of Homer, because they tell the story of the consequence of unlawful or unjust usurpation or rebellion. Henry IV fought all his life to make amends, to go on crusades to Jerusalem and so on, and he had failed. And now we get to see if the sins of the father are going to be visited upon the son. Well, morning finally dawns. The French send a herald one more time to ask Henry to surrender or name a ransom for himself, and Henry takes it as an insult. He tells the herald to get lost. And as the army is preparing for battle, Westmoreland wishes that they had even just 1 in 10,000 of the men who stayed home in England with them now. Because remember that they had left a significant portion of their fighting force at home for defense against Scotland and others before setting off. Now, Henry overhears this wish, and with his generals gathered around, he gives a rousing speech, And it's actually a very famous speech, one of Shakespeare's most well-known. And it's called the Crispin Day speech. In it, he says that he doesn't wish one man more there with him, because it would take away from the honor that they're all going to gain. And that all of them, nobles and common foot soldiers alike, are going to become gentlemen through their actions in battle, or nobled through their actions in battle. He says, "If we are marked to die, we are enough to do our country loss. And if to live, the fewer men, the greater share of honor. God's will, I pray thee wish not one man more. By Jove, I am not covetous for gold, nor care I who doth feed upon my cost. It yearns me not if men my garments wear, such outward things dwell not in my desires. But if it be a sin to covet honor, I am the most offending soul alive. No faith, my coz, wish not a man from England. God's peace, I would not lose so great an honor as one man more, methinks, would share from me, for the best hope I have. Oh, do not wish one more. Rather proclaim it, Westmoreland, through my host, that he which hath no stomach to this fight, let him depart. His passport shall be made, and crowns for convoy put into his purse. We would not die in that man's company that fears his fellowship to die with us. This day is called the Feast of Crispian. He that outlives this day and comes safe home will stand a tiptoe when this day is named, and rouse him at the name of Crispian. He that shall see this day and live old age will yearly on the vigil feast his neighbors, and say, Tomorrow is St. Crispian. Then will he strip his sleeve and show his scars, and say, These wounds I had on Crispin's day. Old men forget, yet all shall be forgot, but he'll remember, with advantages, what feats he did that day. Then shall our names, familiar in his mouth as household words, Harry the King, Bedford and Exeter, Warwick and Talbot, Salisbury and Gloucester, be in their flowing cups freshly remembered. This story shall the good man teach his son, and Crispian shall ne'er go by from this day to the ending of the world, but we in it shall be remembered. We few, we happy few, we band of brothers. For he today that sheds his blood with me shall be my brother, be he ne'er so vile, this day shall gentle his condition. And gentlemen in England, now abed, shall think themselves accursed they were not here, and hold their manhoods cheap, whiles any speaks that fought with us upon St. Crispin's day. Again, notice how he acts as a unifier in the speech. He's already brought together the leaders of Wales, Ireland, and Scotland. Now he brings in the people of low degree, the people he spent his youth drinking and reveling with, the common foot soldier. They're all his band of brothers. And the speech does its job. Everyone is now eager for the fight. The Duke of York actually asks to be placed in one of the most dangerous positions, leading the vanguard, or the advanced guard. An interesting side note about this Duke of York, which Shakespeare doesn't highlight that much, is the fact that this is the same man who was the Duke of O'Merle back in Richard II. You might remember that he was part of a conspiracy to assassinate Bolingbroke that was discovered by his father, and that he had asked for mercy. He's now succeeded to his father's titles, and we see that he fights bravely in this upcoming battle, and that he dies an honorable death. So, the battle begins, and here is where I think the limitations of the stage are really felt in the story. The only actual action that we see taking place in real time is Pistol dueling with a Frenchman and taking him for ransom. So perhaps a good performance of Henry V would include some more skirmishes on the sidelines, with Henry leading a charge or something like that. But we're definitely reminded here of the chorus's caution that it's impossible to reproduce the real scope of a battle on a theater stage. Now, the actual Battle of Agincourt saw the French cavalry charge madly upon the diminished English lines, but then get repelled by both archers and stakes that the English had placed before their army. The French knights were competitive, eager for personal glory, and they didn't operate together as a cohesive unit very well. They all rushed off to capture as many of the enemy soldiers as they could, and they weren't listening to commands from their superiors. And this is why at one point in the play, the Constable of France says that disorder was what had spoiled them. In an action very reminiscent of the Battle of Crécy, which we've studied before, the English longbows overwhelmed the French cavalry as they were charging forward, and they fell back into their own second ranks, which sent the whole army into confusion. And it didn't help that during this particular battle, heavy rains had turned the field where they fought into essentially a giant mud pit. So soldiers were wading through ankle-deep sludge, wearing heavy armor, and many were actually trampled and drowned in the mud itself, as opposed to being killed by weapons of the enemy. Many of the English foot soldiers likely suffered such a fate, and at the same time, the French cavalry could only press forward slowly through the mire, because they're on horseback, and good luck stampeding through a mud pit. And this made them really easy targets for the English archers. So there was chaos on all sides. People are just dropping, drowning in the mud. Many of the French nobility were taken prisoner, all of whom Henry promptly has executed without ransom in a fit of rage. And he does this after he learns that the French, while some of them have been retreating, had actually circled around and attacked his baggage train. And the baggage train, this would have been a group of the army that was guarded by lightly armed servants and young pages, such as Falstaff's page, who presumably died there. And, the baggage train gets attacked. It's kind of a petty move where all of their supplies would have been trampled, destroyed, or burned. And Henry gets so angry when he hears this that he orders, as I said, the execution of the hostages. And this was a very controversial decision then and now. A noble or a knight who surrendered themselves in battle had a right to expect that they would be treated with dignity and released upon paying, obviously, a very large ransom. Of course, today, we're not so much concerned about the violation of considerations of class and rank, so much as that executing unarmed prisoners is something we would deem immoral. In recent years, actually, mock trials have been conducted to determine whether Henry was guilty of war crimes or not. And I think that Shakespeare includes this episode to illustrate the balance that a king sometimes has to strike between mercy and ruthlessness. We've grown to know Henry over the last 3 plays. He doesn't seem like a bad person. We're sympathetic toward him. But this bad act is something that the necessities of kingship have somewhat forced on him. Henry has to send for the French herald to let the enemy know that they either need to get off the field or resume the battle in earnest. Because with everyone riding around haphazardly in small bands, he doesn't know if he's won the battle or not, and he doesn't want more people attacking his baggage train. The herald tells him that he's won, and a list of the dead on each side is drawn up while both armies go about searching for survivors. And when Henry gets a list of the dead, he's astonished, and he has a good right to be. There's a long record of all the French noblemen, dukes, and the men-at-arms who have been slain in the battlefield, about 1,500 dead, and that's not including the common foot soldiers and the mercenaries. The losses of note on the English side, to balance out that 1,500, 25. Now, keep in mind that this is also not including the common foot soldiers. Taking them into account as well, a couple hundred more also died. It's also probably worth noting that the numbers on both sides of this battle are still hotly debated. Even if you go to the Wikipedia article on the Battle of Agincourt, you'll see that there are conflicting opinions. But either way, this is still an amazingly lopsided victory for Henry. More unexpected than the victory of his great-grandfather at the Battle of Crécy. He immediately falls to his knees and gives the glory to God. He actually gives the order for execution to anyone in his army who brags about achieving the victory through their own strength or through their own military might. Because he sees the battle for what it is, a miracle. He shouldn't have won. The French can't believe that he won. It's changed the tide of the English army's fortunes and the tide of the entire war. And it's also changed the mood from the play's perspective. Earlier, we saw the French joking around, and the English were the ones who were in these lowering spirits waiting for the battle. Now, after the battle, it's King Henry who starts joking around, getting up to his old tricks again. For apparently no reason other than to have a laugh, he gives the glove of the soldier Michael Williams, which he said he would wear in his cap, to Fluellen, to see if Williams will be as good as his word and box the Welsh captain on the side of the head. Well, he does, and Henry has to then send others to intervene before the situation gets out of control, because Fluellen's kind of a hothead and he's probably not going to take the insult lightly. And again, this shows that as a leader, he has achieved a sort of balance that neither King Richard or his father had been able to manage. Richard was so wrapped up in his own dramatic personality that he neglected the responsibilities of ruling, and Henry Bolingbroke was so wrapped up in ruling that near the end he almost didn't seem to have a private personality at all, just his public role as the king. And here we see that Henry can be the king and also maintain a bit of his own self, a bit of his old mischievous humor. So for our next lecture, finish the play, read Act 5 of Henry V, where we'll see both the conclusion of Henry's campaign in France and the conclusion of Henry's storyline itself.